Hey everyone, Christian here, and today I'd like to show you the update and dependency management tool Mend Renovate. This is such a great tool that helps you to keep all your Git repositories and software projects up to date, and the cool thing is it supports many programming languages like Node.js, Java, Python and so on, but also Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, all the stuff that we love to use in a HomeLab. I've just recently installed the community version of Mend Renovate in my HomeLab, connected it to my self-hosted GitLab platform, and now it can automatically update all the versioning of the container images or packages in all my repositories. It is super cool. So let's get into it. Let me show you how to deploy and configure it. And a big thanks goes out to Mend, the makers of Renovate, for sponsoring this video. Alright guys, so first of all, let me start with a quick overview of the Mend Renovate application. As I said in the intro of this video, it is an amazing tool that helps developers to automate dependency updates by detecting newer package versions and providing updates directly to the application code. What does that mean and how do those dependency updates work? Well, you simply integrate Mend Renovate into a Git platform where you're storing all your application code, and then it automatically creates so-called pull requests, or shortly called PRs, for any new package versions that are detected. For example, if you have a Git repository that contains a Docker Compose file with an image of Nginx in the version 1.15, and Nginx publishes a new image with the version 1.16, then Renovate can automatically add this version change in the code of your repository, and you just then need to merge this change into the branch. It is super easy. It also has a bunch of other interesting features like an automatic job scheduling and webhooks, so it can scan the repository by itself from time to time, but it also scans it on an event. For example, when a code change is pushed to the repository, and that works with so-called webhooks in the Git platform. We will check out later how exactly that works. And the other cool thing is that you can integrate Renovate in many commonly used Git platforms like Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, and so on. One possibility would be to use the open source CLI project of Mend Renovate, so that comes with all of the interesting core features and functionalities for dependency updates and merge confidence ratings. And the great thing about this deployment is that you can integrate it in most Git platforms that are around, so as you can see in the detailed list down below here. However, the main downside of this deployment is that it's basically just a CLI tool, so any other features like the API calls, webhooks, or automatic job scheduling are not included. If you don't want to mess around with that and you want to have a much simpler deployment type, there's also the Mend Renovate Community Edition, which you can either run in the cloud or completely self-host in your environment. And this one comes with all of the features for automatic job scheduling, webhooks, API calls. So it's all built right into the Renovate container, and that's exactly the deployment type that we're using in this tutorial video. Note, this cannot be integrated with some of the Git platforms that the CLI can be integrated in. For example, Git is missing in this deployment, at least at the time of recording this video, but it is available for GitHub, Bitbucket or GitLab. By the way, both the GitLab Cloud or the self-hosted version. There's also the Mend Renovate Enterprise version available as a paid self-hosted option, and that comes with additional features for professional companies. For example, if you'd like to request technical support from Mend or you need to scale your environment up to enterprise demands. They also have some other cool features in this Enterprise edition like reporting APIs or merge confidence workflows, which is a super interesting feature that helps you to eliminate potential problematic updates while consolidating reliable updates into single PRs. And that improves the dependency update efficiency while still maintaining code stability. Some great features for enterprise environments. But if you're just running a self-hosted instance of GitLab like I'm doing in my HomeLab, or maybe you are using a private GitHub repository, you can still use the Mend Renovate Community Edition, which is completely free. And that was especially interesting for me since I'm running my own self-hosted GitLab server in my HomeLab. Then I don't need to use the cloud at all for my deployments and updates. It is all running completely in my private environment. Alright guys, so let's start with the installation tutorial of the Mend Renovate Community Edition. By the way, before I show you how to deploy this application in your self-hosted environment, I also want to mention if you're interested in learning more about the cloud-hosted version, I just recently did another video about how I'm using the Mend Renovate app on my public GitHub repository. So I'll leave you a link to this video in the description box down below if you want to learn more about it. And this is, by the way, also available for Bitbucket. The Azure integration is also coming out soon. But if you're like me, me and you're also running your private GitLab platform at home, you should definitely get started with the self-hosted option. Note, this however requires you to first get a license key from Mend, but don't worry, this is still completely free, so you just have to enter this short form and fill in your name and email address to get this free license key from Mend. So once you have your license key and you want to get started with Mend Renovate and deploy it, you first should check out the official documentation you can find under docs.renovatebot.com. Here you will find a reference for all the configuration options and how to deploy it. However, I have to say sometimes this documentation is a bit confusing because there are so many different types of deployments of Renovate, and sometimes it's not easy to find out what information is exactly meant for your specific deployment type. So what I would recommend you to do is go to the Getting Started section of the documentation, then go to Running Renovate, and here you will find a link to the self-hosted Mend Renovate Community Edition and Enterprise Edition GitHub repository. So if you check out this repository, you will find more information about how to deploy the Community and Enterprise Edition of Mend Renovate. And if you go to the Docs section, you also have some Markdown files that describe the setup process on GitHub or on GitLab for both the Enterprise and Community Editions. So the guide that I have used is this one here, the Configure a Renovate Community Edition for GitLab. And there you will find detailed instructions that you basically just have to follow. Now, I will start with deploying the Mend Renovate app in a Docker container in my HomeLab. As you guys know, I'm always deploying everything in Docker because it's just the easiest way to get something up and running quickly. And here, if you scroll down this document, you will find a template. By the way, if you want to have a full write-up with all the templates, commands, and instructions that we are using in this video and you easily want to follow them along, then check out my write-up on Patreon. You will find a link to it in the description box down below, so yeah, you will find all the information. You can, by the way, even watch the video without any ad interruptions, and it would be so kind of you if you consider supporting me for all the free tutorials that I'm creating here. Alright, so now that we've copied this here, let's open a connection on one of my servers. I'm going to use my production server 1, and I'm going to create a new project directory that I'm just call renovate demo 1 and cd into that directory. Now, I need to open this in VS Code as well because that's going to be easier to work. So let's also open this project folder here, and then we can start creating our Docker Compose file. Now, let's first of all paste all the information from the template of the documentation in here. I just like to do a few customizations to it because, as you might know, this version statement, I don't like it because it's a deprecated setting. I don't know why this is in each and every documentation and tutorial online, but hey, I don't know. Next thing is we need to check out the current version of Mend Renovate. So this you should also find on the GitHub repository. So just go to the main section and go to Packages for the Renovate Community Edition. And here you can see the version 8.1.1 is currently the latest one at the time of recording this video. So I can just copy this tag, go back into my Compose file and change the version parameter here with this version. Alright, so I also don't like this restart statement at the top of the file. This is just personal preference, honestly. You can customize it to anything that you like, but I just like to set it to unless stopped. And I also like to put a container name for all of my projects in here. Now, the important part of this deployment is that you use those environment variables to configure how Mend Renovate can be authenticated to the Git platform that you want integrated in. First of all, I'm going to enable the debug logging because then you can see a couple of interesting log lines. So if you have some problems like, hey, Mend Renovate cannot access your Git repository, it doesn't do the things that you want it to do, then it might be recommended to enable the debug logging because it gives you a lot of detailed output of the scheduler and how the GitHub repositories are processed. And you also need to accept the terms of service here. And here you need to put in your license key. So of course, I'm not putting it here in plain text, so I'm using another environment variable. We're gonna go through those later in a second. Now, one thing might also be interesting here in this section, and this is the github.com token. You might be wondering, so why the hell do we need that if we want to integrate it in GitLab? Well, that's mainly because Mend Renovate can retrieve change logs from packages or container images that have a repository on github.com, which most applications have, let's be honest. And that might be interesting to enable this and put in your personal access token of GitHub so that Mend Renovate can retrieve those change logs for you and you directly can see them in the pull requests. Also, what I am gonna change is the port exposure because the problem is that I'm currently using the port 80 on my production server as you might know from my traffic reverse proxy. Now, Mend Renovate, of course, can also be integrated in traffic pretty easily, but I'm not doing it in this tutorial. But if you've watched any of my other traffic videos, you probably know how to do that. Now, I think this is not actually that critical if you're running this on the same Docker network, and if this is a protected environment. It is still recommended to not use the unencrypted connections and use TLS certificates and so on. Just know I'm lazy for this demonstration, skipping it, but I have done this on my production environment, of course. What you can also do is those optional things here. So you can also add this one here in the persistent volume. So this will make sure that you're using a persistent database between sessions. Mend Renovate will probably work without it, so this is entirely optional. But there are things like if you have a long scanning list and the Mend Renovate container stops at some point, it can automatically continue the latest action it has done, and it doesn't need to start from scratch, which might encounter some issues. But yeah, for anything else, I think this template is pretty good. Alright, so now we need to just fill in the secret information into the environment variable. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a new file that I'm calling .env, and I'm basically just copying those environment variable placeholders in this file. As you might already guess, you need to put in your Mend Renovate license key that you have just gotten from Mend in here, and then you need to put in the endpoint URL of your GitHub or GitLab self-hosted instance. So in my example, because I'm using the self-hosted GitLab platform, I will start with the URL or the main URL of this platform. And now after the slash, you need to put in API/version 4. So this is the endpoint URL that Mend Renovate needs to get access to. And then you have to fill in your GitLab personal access token and secret. No, we haven't created this personal access token yet, so I'm also going to show you how that works. If we go back to the Mend Renovate documentation and scroll up, this is actually one of the first steps that you have to do to integrate the Mend Renovate bot account in your GitLab platform. So it is important that you should create a new user account for the Mend Renovate bot, which is a bit different from the GitHub deployment, because on GitHub, the Mend Renovate is an application, but in GitLab, it is just a regular user account, and this user account, of course, should have access to all the Git repositories that you want integrated in. So I've already created a user, as you can see in the admin area. I've created this user here called Renovate Bot. I've also given it a nice icon so that you can easily identify all the merge requests from this user. And once you have created it, you need to create a personal access token for this user account. To create this personal access token for the Mend Renovate bot account, you just need to click on impersonate, so then you're logging in with that user account and you can do all the settings. I'm sorry for the light mode here, so as you can see, the Renovate bot account doesn't use the dark mode. But anyway, it's not that important. We just needed to create the personal access token. So click on that user account here, click on edit profile and go to access tokens. As you can see, I've already created one token that is expiring in 11 months. So you cannot create a personal access token forever, unfortunately. And then you need to select the correct scopes to give the bot account the correct permissions to be able to do all the necessary changes that it needs to do. So first it needs to have access to the API, of course, and then you need to enable the read user and the write repository scope. And once you got that, you just need to copy this, go back to our Docker Compose template and put it into the .env file. Alright, so once we have that, we also need to create a system hook in our GitLab platform. So that is important because whenever we push a code change to any of our repositories, the Renovate bot would need to scan this repository for any changes that we have made. And the easiest way to do this in GitLab is to create a system hook that is valid for all the repositories in our platform. Here we need to enter the URL of our Renovate bot. So this usually is the name, the IP address, or the DNS record that points to the IP address of the server where you're deploying the Renovate application. So here I could use this IP address, or I simply use the DNS name of my server. And let's select HTTP server production1.home.steelcreative.de. And now it is important that we push this web request to the port where the Renovate bot is listening to. So in this example, it is 8084. Also add the /webhook at the end. And now it is important that you add a secret token. So this secret token is something like a password that the GitLab platform is using to send a web request. And in the Renovate application, you can check whether this secret token is valid or not. Because otherwise, if you publish this Renovate bot somewhere on an internal or external network, anyone could just send a web request to this address and trigger the Renovate bot or do something with it. Therefore, it is important that only valid addresses like this GitLab system hook has the right secret token for the Renovate app. So by default, this is always set to Renovate, but you could also add any other secret token. It is just important that the secret token has to match with what you put in the .env file in this environment variable, webhook secret. So here we put in just Renovate. That is the default, and use the same secret token for the system hook. Now you can also select when this system hook should be called from the GitLab platform. So Renovate needs to listen for two specific events, one for any push requests and one for merge requests. So it is important to select this here, and merge request events you can deselect the repository update event. So once you have that, you should also disable the enable SSL verification, because we're using HTTP in this case. If you're using traffic with trusted TLS certificates, it would of course help for securing this environment if you enable the SSL verification. So just know for this demonstration, I cannot enable this. Okay, so that's basically everything we have to do for preparing the Renovate bot. And now we can go in here and start this container. So let's go back to the project directory and let's execute a Docker Compose up. And if you enable the debug logging, you can already see what's currently happening. As you can see, this Renovate app already recognized all the repositories it has access to. So these are all the existing repositories that I have in my GitLab platform. But of course, if you're using it for any new repositories, or if you have existing repositories where the bot doesn't have access to, it might not be able to see those. So let's go also through the process of how you would set up a new repository where the bot is updating all the packages and versioning. So let's go back to GitLab and let's create a new testing project. For now, I'm just going to start with a blank example and just call this Renovate Test 1. As you can see, I'm not very creative with my project names, but anyway, let's put it under my current user. Now, it is important for the bot to get access to this repository. So if you set the visibility level to private, it might not have access to this repository, only if you set it to internal or to public. But I want to show you how to do this when you set this to private. So here, I'm just going to create this repository. And what is now important for the Renovate bot to get access to this repository, we need to go to Manage Members and then simply invite our Renovate bot account that we've just created. Make sure to select this role to a developer at least. So let's invite the bot so it gets access to it. And now if we go back to the log files, you should see and the repository has been scanned. So now if this is an empty repository, if there's nothing in here, let's go back to the GitLab platform in the project directory. You will not see anything here other than a merge request that says configure renovate. And this merge request will basically create an example renovate.json file in your repository. So without that file, Renovate is not doing any checking on your repository. This is the main configuration file that you need to create for each and every repository. And there you can configure what exactly Renovate is looking for and how it deals with the versioning updates, what packages it should look for, and any other package rules or extended customization. So we will also go through some of those configuration options later, but just know if it's not existing and the Renovate bot has access to this repo, it will try to create this renovate.json by itself. And then you can just go into this merge request and merge it into the code. Now, once this is done and you go back to the project, you see the new file renovate.json is in here. And now Renovate will also create a dependency dashboard as an issue where Renovate will put in any detected dependencies. So when there is a Docker Compose file, a Terraform file, a Kubernetes manifest, whatever you have configured, it will list those dependencies with the current version that it has detected. And if there are any updates or changes that you might have to do. One thing that I also have to tell you about this dependency dashboard is, and I first of all need to go in another repository where I have something like this, for example, the Cert Manager repository where I'm storing my Helm values for the Cert Manager deployment on Kubernetes. If I go to this dependency dashboard in here, you can see Renovate creates some checkboxes in these dependency dashboards. And if you click on this, it will create a different event. And this event by default is unfortunately not existing in this system webhooks. So I had this problem that in this dependency dashboard, sometimes I try to click on those checkboxes and it didn't do anything here because the system webhook in GitLab only has events for push changes, but not for any issue changes. And those webhooks you have to create for each and every repository that you're using Renovate for. So if you are using this dependency dashboard, you have to go in here, go to settings, webhooks, and then create a webhook just similar to the system webhook. And there you have to enable the issue events so that whenever you are clicking the checkbox on the dependency dashboard, this webhook is calling Renovate to trigger those actions and do whatever it needs to do. So this is important that you have to set those webhooks as well. Okay guys, so I know what you're thinking right now. This is quite a lot that you have to set up and configure to get this all working in GitLab. But don't worry, all the time that you are investing now to prepare everything, that will definitely pay off in the end when you want to stay up to date with all the packages and versioning in GitLab. So let's also go through some of the examples of how exactly you're going to set up Renovate and how it's helping you to save the day. So let's go back to our Renovate Test 1 repository that we've just created. We have invited the Renovate bot as a member. We have created the webhook and the system hook, and we have merged the initial renovate.json file into the main branch of the Git repository. Now that we have all that, we can start adding our code or our packages to this repository, and Renovate will automatically check whenever we push a change to this if there is a new version of those packages existing. Let me show how that is working and first clone this repository to my local workstation. So I'm just going to create a new project folder and clone it in here. Let's open this in VS Code, and here we have our repository. I'm just putting in a simple template here for an Nginx web server in the version 1.15. So this is not the current version that is out there, it is an older version, but this is on purpose. So I want to see how Renovate scans this repository and how it notifies us about any code change. Of course, we need to push this Docker Compose file first to our project. Let's check if the files are there. All right. So now if we take a look at the log files of Renovate, you will see that there is a new webhook because there was a push event on our repository renovate-test.1. And if this is finished, we can go back to the dependency dashboard and you should see that there is a new dependency detected, Docker Compose, in this docker compose.yaml file for the Nginx container image in version 1.15. So, as you can already see, there is an open item. This is the update, the Docker tag to version 1.27.1. So this probably is the latest version of Nginx. And as you can see here, it is a minor update. So just as a short explanation, what is a minor update? There are also major updates and patches existing. A minor update is basically a version change in the middle number here. So the 15 to 27 is a minor update. A major update would be from version 1.15 to version 2. Whatever. So this would be a major change if the first version number changes. And a patch would be if the last number changes. And now that we have this change in the merge request, we can also see the commits that Renovate has done. And it has updated this line here and changed it from this version to that updated version. So we can basically just go in here and merge this change in our code. And once we have done that, we can go back to VS Code and pull down the latest updates, and it has also been updated in our code. So this is super useful because then you can stay up to date with all of the container images and patches. Of course, you would have to go now and deploy this somewhere. But if you probably know, I'm a big fan of automation. If you would integrate this GitLab into CI/CD or whatever, you could also automatically upload this file somewhere, deploy the new version. I've done some automation like this before with GitHub. I just need to do it for GitLab as well. Yeah, but then you can do a lot of your day-to-day work as a sysadmin that you would have to do manually and fully automate this with a tool like Renovate. It's super useful. Alright guys, so that's basically how to use Mend Renovate for any Docker image updates. I think this is already such a big help to keep up to date with all your Docker Compose projects, because I know so many people within our community will use Docker Compose files for their HomeLab. However, I also know that many people are using Kubernetes or Terraform or any other packages. So let me just go through some of the configuration settings that I think are the most useful for my setup, and that might help you to find out how you can make the best use of Renovate for your environment as well. So let's get into it. One thing that I found to be super useful is to add the assignee to any of the package updates. So how I'm using this is I always go in my Renovate configuration file and I add a new section in here called assignees. And here you can put in the username of your GitLab account. So this is my account name. And when I add this to the renovate.json file and I push this code change, it will automatically add me as an assignee. So that means I get a notification and I get a new item in my to-do list. For example, this year, the Postgres database Docker image tag was just updated to the version 16.4 3 hours ago. And I can see, there's something I might have to update on my HomeLab servers. So this is how you can get better notified about anything that is going on, especially if you have a lot of different separate repositories like I have. So that is really super useful. Another cool thing is to enable the Kubernetes manifest sections. For example, if you have an Nginx deployment file, something like this in your repository. And here, for example, we are using, let's use the version 1.15.1 Alpine for this deployment here. You will notice that those Kubernetes manifests are not detected by Renovate by default. So if you go to the dependency dashboard, you can still see the Docker compose file, but you will not see the Kubernetes manifest because Renovate doesn't know how the Kubernetes manifest file look like. There's no standard format for the naming convention or something like this. And this is why you have to customize the Kubernetes module here with a file match, for example. So you can give it a name, something like it should look for all files that end with .yaml. But that would also mean it might check Docker compose files. So therefore, I'm using a different configuration setting to enable the Kubernetes API for all files that are inside a folder that is called Kubernetes, and all the files that end with .yaml under this Kubernetes folder are automatically checked for Kubernetes API versioning updates. So as long as you put those files in the folder name that is called Kubernetes, it will automatically be checked by Renovate, and then it can define, there is an image with version 1.15, it might have an update. So let's push this change here to enable the Kubernetes manifest module and synchronize the changes. And if we go back to the dependency dashboard, we might need to refresh it. Here you can see we have added another detected dependency in the Kubernetes folder for the deployment.yaml file, and that has Nginx deployed in the version 1.15.1 Alpine. And if we go to merge request, you should see a new merge request for the Docker tag, but it contains two minor updates now, one for the Docker compose file and another one for the Kubernetes manifest file. So we have them both in one merge request. Now that is really cool. So you can enable it and use it for Docker. You can use it for Kubernetes manifest. This is really great. You can, by the way, also use it for Helm files. So for example, if we want to install something like Cert Manager on our Kubernetes cluster, we first need to download the Helm repository to our local workstation and then execute the Helm install command to install the Cert Manager using the Helm chart in a specific version. So if you want to customize some of the settings of this Helm chart, I would have to create a new file that I usually put somewhere in a Helm folder, but the name of the folder here is not important as it would be on Kubernetes, but you put this into a file that you call values.yaml. Then you can make all the necessary changes. For example, change the install CRDs to true. Now, it is important for Renovate also put in the container image tags, and then it can also find out whether there is a new container image version existing for your Helm deployment. And usually those are located under the image section somewhere. So here, for example, you can see there is an image section with a repository. It's important to put in this repository to your Helm values file. You can see the current version tag somewhere here in the application version, so that, for example, you have to put in the tag. And let's just assume I've not installed this version here. I've installed the version 1.15.1, for example, and I've used this Helm values file to deploy my application. Let's push this to GitLab and let's go back to the GitLab platform. You can see in the dependency dashboard of Renovate that it detected another Helm value file with the version 1.15.1, and as you can see there, it requests automatically an update to the Docker tag to version 1.15.3. So this is the current version of the application that we find in the latest chart version. And here in this merge request, if we check the committed files, you can see that it automatically updated this tag to 1.15.3. This is how you can use Renovate for Helm charts as well. The same, by the way, also works for any Terraform providers. So for example, if I go to my to-do list, I know I have another update in my DNS Helm chart for the Terraform provider. As you can see, this automatically detects the required provider, and there is a new version of the HashiCorp DNS provider in one of my Terraform files. So Renovate can also make version changes to those packages without any further configuration. This is pretty cool. Alright guys, so that's basically everything that I have used Renovate for in my HomeLab. Of course, I'm still exploring some other configuration settings that might be useful here and there, but depending on what exactly you are using it for in your HomeLab, you might have to customize it according to your environment anyways. So I'd say let's make a cut here and let's share some of the best practices and configuration settings for Renovate within our Discord community and of course in my boilerplates repository on GitHub. As always, thank you so much for watching. A big thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. You guys are really just the best, and I'm gonna catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.